The courtroom is so quiet that you can hear the ceiling lights humming. Everyone in the room is staring at Kody Brown as the judge slowly opens a thick file full of financial records, property deeds, and messages that were never meant to be seen. Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, Meri Brown, and Robyn Brown are now in a brutal legal battle that started as a private family fight. The secrets that are about to come out could change everything fans thought they knew about the Sister Wives family. But then, the judge reads one line from the evidence and the whole courtroom goes crazy because the document suggests that someone in the family may have been hiding millions and that someone else knew about it all along. If that shocking claim is true, it could change the Brown family's story for good. Before the first witness even gets on the stand, ask yourself this: who has been lying for years and who is telling the truth? Light from the morning sun streams through the tall windows of the courtroom, crossing the polished wooden floor. A quiet murmur fills the gallery. You can't bring cameras inside, but the tension is just as thick as it is in any episode of Sister Wives. Kody Brown is in the middle of the room, with his shoulders stiff and his fingers locked together so tightly that his knuckles have turned white. Christine Brown, Janelle Brown, and Meri Brown, the women who once built a life with him, sit across the aisle. Their faces look calm on the outside, but they are full of years of stress. Robyn Brown is sitting a few seats away from Kody, a little behind him, holding a folded tissue as if the room could fall apart at any moment. The room gets quiet when the judge walks in. Chairs softly scrape against the floor before everyone sits down again, and all of a sudden, the moment feels heavier than anyone thought it would. What started as a quiet disagreement about money in the family months ago has turned into a full-blown court battle that could tear apart every memory the Brown family ever shared. But the truth about what really happened in that family might be much worse than anyone thought. The lawyer for Christine, Janelle, and Meri slowly stands up, buttons his jacket, and then steps forward. His voice is calm but sharp as he starts to explain how years of sharing money, property, and trust slowly changed into something else. The papers on the table show that a number of big financial choices were made behind closed doors. These choices may have moved family money into property that was directly linked to Kody and Robyn. The lawyer stops talking, and the silence in the courtroom grows as the meaning sinks in. Kody's jaw gets tight, but he doesn't say anything. And right now, everyone in the courtroom is asking the same question. Was this a mistake, or has something been hidden for years? The lawyer walks over to a big board where copies of property records are on display. He points to dates, signatures, and transfers that seem to link the family's shared property to land bought through a different structure. The explanation is slow and careful, but the effect is instant. As people start to get what the fight is really about, a quiet ripple goes through the room. It's not just about the land. It's all about trust. It's about whether the system that kept the Brown family together was quietly changed without anyone knowing. Kody finally leans forward and whispers something to his lawyer. No one else can hear him. Robyn stares at him with wide eyes, her face showing a mix of worry and disbelief. Christine is sitting perfectly still across the aisle, her hands folded in her lap. But her gaze is firmer than it was years ago. She doesn't look at Kody or Robyn, she just looks straight ahead, as if the moment she's been waiting for has finally come. Because what Christine knows about those money decisions could completely change the story that people have been telling for years. The judge nods to the lawyer, telling him to keep going. He picks up another piece of paper, this one older, with edges that are a little worn. According to the timeline he gives, a number of family properties were supposed to be shared investments for all of the spouses. However, in a short amount of time, some deals moved money out of the communal structure and into assets that mostly helped one household. The lawyer doesn't raise his voice, but every word hits like a rock thrown into calm water. Kody finally moves in his seat, which is clear that he is now uncomfortable. His lawyer quickly stands up and objects to how the argument is framed, saying that everyone knew about the decisions at the time they were made. Before letting the explanation continue, the judge listens carefully and reminds both sides that the court is there to find out what really happened, not what they think happened. And the details of those real estate deals might be more complicated than anyone thought. The lawyer turns a little toward the witness stand and calls out the first name that makes everyone in the room sit up and take notice, Janelle Brown. Janelle slowly gets up from her chair. People in her family called her the practical one, the calm voice, the one who dealt with numbers and made long-term plans for years. Now she walks up to the witness stand with a quiet determination that is very different from how she used to act on TV. She raises her right hand and sits down, folding her hands together. The lawyer then starts to ask her direct but gentle questions about how the family used to handle money. Janelle says that for most of their life together, the money each household made went into a shared pool that was used to pay for mortgages, bills, and property investments that were meant to help the whole family. Her tone stays the same, but each sentence has a lot of meaning. Because what Janelle is about to say could be the first sign that the system that kept the Brown family together was starting to break down. The lawyer asks about a meeting from a few years ago when the family talked about buying land that would be shared by everyone. Janelle slowly nods, remembering what happened. She says that at first, everyone agreed that the land would be fairly divided among the families once building started. But as she talks, her voice changes a little and becomes more careful. She remembers that some of the paperwork changed later after a few talks that didn't include everyone in the family. The courtroom gets even quieter as the meaning sinks in. Kody's lawyer stands up again and asks if the memory is accurate, but the judge lets Janelle finish her explanation. And all of a sudden, the people in the courtroom start to think that there might be two very different versions of this story. Janelle looks at Kody for a second before looking back at the lawyer. There is no anger in her face, just a tired clarity that comes from years of talking about things that never got resolved. She says that for a long time, she trusted how the family was set up. She thought there was a good reason for the changes in the documents, something that would make sense once everyone talked about it. But that talk never really happened. Instead, the details got more and more confusing as time went on. Some payments seemed to go through accounts that she no longer had full control over. Before she even saw the papers, it looked like some decisions about property were already made. The lawyer lets her words sink in before asking a simple question that hangs in the air longer than anyone expects. Did she still think the system was fair? Janelle stops. Her eyes dart back and forth between the gallery and the judge, and the answer she gives could change the whole case. Before she speaks, she lets out a long breath. She says that at first she thought everything would work out in the end. But after a while, she started to see that some investments seemed to make one household stronger than the others. The lawyer asks her to be more specific about which household she means, but Kody's lawyer stands up right away with another objection. The judge raises a hand to signal for quiet and tells the lawyer to ask the question again. The tension in the room is so strong that it feels like it's pushing down on everyone. Robyn holds the tissue tightly in her hands and looks at Kody for a moment as if she is looking for comfort. At that point, it's clear that the next few minutes of testimony could change everything. Janelle finally answers carefully, saying that some financial choices seem to put the stability of Kody and Robyn's home first, leaving other homes unsure about who would own shared assets in the long term. The statement hits home with a lot of force, even though her voice never rises. Kody shifts again, this time leaning back and sighing in frustration. His lawyer writes notes on a yellow pad. The lawyer for the other wives nods slowly, as if he knows what the answer will be. He asks Janelle if she ever talked to Kody directly about these worries. She nods again and talks about a few conversations in which she asked for clearer explanations of how the property agreements worked. She said that those talks often ended with promises that everything would be worked out later. But something that happened during a private talk with Kody may show a lot more than anyone thought it would. As the lawyer leans closer to the witness stand, he lowers his voice a little and asks Janelle to tell him about the moment she first thought the situation might be worse than a simple misunderstanding. For the first time since she got on the stand, Janelle hesitates. She looks at Christine for a moment, and Christine gives her a small, encouraging nod. The courtroom seems to be holding its breath. Finally, Janelle says that one night, while they were talking about future building plans on the shared land, she saw something in the paperwork that didn't match what the family had originally agreed on. The way the land was divided up seemed to give one family a lot more power over the whole property. She says that when she asked Kody about it, he brushed off her worry and said that everything would still work out fairly. But she didn't like the explanation. And what Janelle found out after that conversation could be the most shocking piece of evidence in the whole trial. The lawyer slowly moves a folder across the table toward the judge, then turns back to the witness stand. He asks Janelle if she got copies of the final property documents later. She nods again, confirming that she did look over the filings herself in the end. She said that the papers showed a structure that was very different from what the family had talked about before. The courtroom changes with a low murmur before the judge tells everyone to be quiet again. Kody's lawyer stands up right away and says that the interpretation is wrong without more information. The judge agrees that context is needed, but lets the testimony go on, and now everyone in the courtroom is waiting for the one piece of information that could change the case. Janelle takes a breath and looks the lawyer in the eye. He asks her one last question for now. When she saw those papers, did she think that the Brown family's finances had changed without everyone agreeing? The pause that comes after seems to last forever. Kody even stops moving and watches her closely. Then, Janelle quietly says yes, she thinks the system has changed and that the change seems to help Kody and Robyn more than anyone else. The words fall into the courtroom like a heavy stone into water. Robyn's eyes get bigger and Kody leans over to his lawyer and whispers something urgent. But the lawyer for the other side isn't done yet. He takes one last piece of paper out of the folder and turns to the judge with a calm look on his face. He says that the paperwork Janelle talked about could be just a small part of a bigger financial pattern. And if the next witness backs up what those records say, the case will go far beyond just property disputes. The next piece of evidence could show that someone in the Brown family knew exactly what was going on long before this case ever made it to court. That person could be in the room right now. After Janelle's last words, the courtroom is still in a strange silence, as if everyone is slowly taking in what she just said. The judge puts on his glasses and looks down at the papers that were just given to him. Kody Brown, on the other side of the room, shifts uncomfortably in his chair, his posture no longer confident but cautious. Before the bailiff calls for order again, a low whisper goes through the gallery. Janelle Brown stays on the witness stand for a little while longer, her hands calmly folded in front of her, but the way she looks ahead now is unmistakably final, as if years of unanswered questions have finally led to this moment. The lawyer for the other wives slowly walks up to the stand, flips through a few pages, and then speaks again in a calm voice that can be heard clearly in the courtroom. He asks Janelle if she ever talked to anyone else in the family about the money problems before they got so bad that they had to go to court. Janelle thinks for a moment and looks quickly at the seats behind the lawyer where Christine Brown and Meri Brown are sitting quietly. Then she says that yes, she did talk to Christine about it, and that conversation changed everything she thought she knew about how the family handled their money. And what Christine told her in that private talk would be the thing that set off the chain of events that brought them all to this courtroom. The lawyer slowly nods, letting the tension build, and then asks Janelle to tell her more about that conversation. Janelle takes a breath and says that one night, after weeks of quietly going over papers and trying to understand the land agreements, she decided to call Christine. At that point, the family had already been through years of emotional stress, but money had always been seen as a stable, useful thing that everyone could count on. Janelle thought Christine would be surprised when she told her about her worries about the property filings. Instead, Christine sounded quiet, as if she had been waiting for someone else to notice the same thing. People lean forward in their seats, which makes the courtroom move a little, because what Christine said that night made it seem like the Brown family's money problems were much more complicated than anyone had thought. Janelle keeps talking, her voice steady but heavy with memories. She said that Christine had told her that she had noticed strange choices months before when property division talks kept changing without clear reasons. Christine thought at first that it was just a case of confusion or miscommunication, but as time went on, she started to feel like some plans were being quietly changed. Christine is said to have gone silent for a few seconds after Janelle told her about the documents she had seen. Then she said something that Janelle says she will never forget. If she can remember the exact words, the lawyer leans in a little closer and asks her to say them again. Janelle slowly nods. Christine told her, "If those papers say what you think they say, then the plan was changed a long time ago." Suddenly, the people in the courtroom start to understand that this fight may have been going on for years before anyone outside the family noticed. Kody's lawyer quickly stands up and says that the testimony is just speculation, but the judge lets the description stand for now, saying that it is based on the witness's own experiences and conversations. Kody leans back in his chair, clearly upset, rubs his forehead for a moment, and then whispers to his lawyer again. A few seats away, Robyn Brown stares straight ahead, her face pale and hard to read. The lawyer turns back to Janelle and asks what happened after she talked to Christine. Janelle says that they started comparing notes, going over old conversations about money and property plans to see if anything else suddenly made sense. They started to see a pattern, but only slowly and one piece at a time. Some of the first choices about the family's shared land seemed to change soon after some new financial problems came up. Payments were changed around, people's duties were switched, and the paperwork that showed those changes didn't always get to all the family members at the same time. And the more they looked at those details, the less likely it was that everything had happened by chance. The lawyer walks back to the table with the evidence and picks up another file, this one thicker than the others. There are copies of financial timelines and property transfer records that go back several years. He asks Janelle if she ever talked to Kody Brown directly after talking to Christine. Again, Janelle nods slowly. She says that the fight happened at a family meeting where they were supposed to talk about plans for building on the shared land. At first, the conversation was calm, but when she asked for more information about the ownership structure in the papers, the mood in the room changed right away. Janelle said that Kody seemed annoyed by the questions and kept saying that everything was still fair and that the paperwork was just a reflection of the realities of financing and mortgages. But when Janelle asked for clearer answers, the conversation got tense. And something Kody said during that meeting would later echo in Janelle's mind again and again. The attorney asks her to explain. Janelle pauses briefly, remembering the moment. She says that during the argument, Kody eventually leaned forward and said, "Sometimes decisions have to be made for the good of the whole family, even if everyone doesn't understand them right away." At the time, she wasn't sure what he meant by that statement, but after looking over the financial papers more carefully, the words started to sound different, less like reassurance and more like a justification. The courtroom goes quiet again as the meaning sinks in. If those choices were made on purpose, it makes it much more important to know who really had control over the family's money. Kody's lawyer quickly stands up again and says that the statement is being taken out of context, but the judge just nods and lets the questioning continue. The lawyer asks Janelle if that meeting put her mind at ease. She shakes her head slowly. She says that the conversation made her feel less sure than before. Shortly after that meeting, Christine decided to look more closely at the financial agreements she had made with her family. What she found made things even more confusing. Janelle says that Christine found out that the financial obligations connected to her home were set up very differently from those connected to Kody and Robyn's home. And that discovery would soon lead Christine to make a choice that shocked everyone in the family. The lawyer stops for a moment to let the tension build before asking Janelle what choice she is talking about. Janelle looks at Christine again before answering in a low voice. Christine chose to leave the shared financial system completely and start separating her money from the family. At first, Janelle thought the move was just about getting away from the stress of being in a relationship for so long. But as time went on, she started to think that Christine might have been reacting to something more than just problems in their relationship. The courtroom is even quieter now, and the weight of the story is pulling everyone forward. If Christine knew something was wrong before anyone else, it could change how the whole case timeline is understood. The lawyer thinks for a moment, then turns to the judge and says that the next witness will give more information about the financial changes that Janelle talked about. He stops on purpose before saying the name that makes a lot of people in the gallery turn their heads: Christine Brown. Janelle slowly walks down from the stand and past Christine on her way back to her seat. The two women look at each other quickly, with no drama or emotion, but with a deep understanding. Christine gets up and walks steadily toward the stand. The bailiff gives the oath, and she sits down, resting her hands lightly on the wooden railing in front of her. As soon as Christine starts talking, the people in the courtroom know that this testimony could be much more emotional than the one that came before it. The lawyer starts off slowly by asking Christine to explain how she understood the family's finances when things were still pretty stable. Christine says that the idea of shared finances came from the idea that every household was equally important. Money was supposed to help everyone, including homes, kids, and long-term safety. But as time went on, she started to notice small changes in how choices were being made. People started talking about money without her being there. Some plans looked like they were set in stone before she even heard about them. At first, she thought it was just a lack of communication. But one quiet moment alone at her kitchen table going over some papers would change how she thought about everything. The lawyer wants her to talk about that moment. Christine's voice gets quieter as she talks about the night she first saw the difference in property records for the shared land. The papers showed a structure that didn't match what she remembered from the talks. At first, she thought she was getting the legal language wrong, but the more she read, the more clear the pattern became. The way the land was divided seemed to favor one household in a way that the family had never talked about before. Later, when she talked to Janelle about the papers, things started to make sense. And that realization led to the first serious talk about whether the family's finances had changed without anyone's permission. Kody leans forward again, looking tense, and Robyn watches the witness stand with wide, worried eyes. The lawyer asks Christine if she thinks those money choices were made on purpose. The question stays in the air longer than expected. Christine takes a slow breath and then carefully says that she can't say she knows every detail of how the choices were made. But she does think that the outcome made it so that some households were more at risk than others. The courtroom whispers again before the judge tells everyone to be quiet. If that imbalance was planned, it could become the most important part of the case. The lawyer takes a step back and lets the silence grow before speaking again. He says that the court will soon look at more papers related to the property agreements and money transfers that Janelle and Christine talked about. The court needs to hear one more piece of evidence before those documents are shown. He looks at the judge calmly and says that another witness has already agreed to talk about conversations that took place long before any legal action started. A witness who might have heard Kody talk about money matters directly. The judge slowly nods and asks the lawyer to name the witness for the record. The lawyer turns a little toward the gallery before speaking in a soft but clear voice. Meri Brown will be the next person to testify. As Meri slowly gets up from her seat, a wave of surprise goes through the room. Kody's head turns sharply toward her, and his face suddenly shows a lot of worry. As Meri walks toward the witness stand, everyone in the courtroom seems to have the same thought at the same time. If Meri says what the others think, the story of what really happened in the Brown family could change forever. The courtroom is full of tension as Meri Brown walks up to the witness stand. Each step is careful, and her hands shake a little, as if the weight of years of secrecy is too much for her to handle. She sits carefully, putting her hands together and taking a deep breath to calm down. The gallery is quiet, and the weight is almost too much to bear. For the first time since the trial began, it feels like everyone in the Brown family and everyone watching could hold their breath at the same time. The lawyer who is talking to her starts out gently, asking Meri to talk about her part in the family's money decisions and what she remembers about the land agreements they made together. At first, Meri's voice is soft and unsure, but as she starts to tell the story, it becomes more authoritative. She says that for a long time she trusted the system the family had set up because she thought that every household would be treated fairly and that Kody's advice would be unbiased. But over time, she saw things that made her uneasy. Some meetings left out certain members, some decisions seemed to be made before everyone had a chance to talk about them, and some documents seemed to favor one household over the others. And the moment Meri realized how big those decisions were, she had kept it to herself for years. The lawyer leans in and asks Meri to describe that moment in detail. She stops for a moment and looks at Kody, who is sitting still and pale and avoiding her gaze. She talks about a quiet night she spent alone at home going over property records and noticing differences in how land and money were split up. At first she thought it was a mistake, but the more she looked into it, the more it became clear that some properties and funds had been redirected and the structure she had trusted for so long was not what it seemed. She doesn't cry, but her eyes fill up a little as she talks about how hurt and confused she was. And this quiet confession in the comfort of her own home would soon become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the trial. The attorney asks if she confronted anyone about it. Meri says that she did speak to Christine privately, hoping to understand whether she had noticed the same patterns. According to Meri, Christine confirmed some of her suspicions, but admitted that she hadn't fully realized the extent until reviewing her own household's financial records. The two of them began quietly comparing notes, trying to reconstruct the timeline of property transfers, payments, and agreements that had occurred over several years. What they uncovered was far more complex than either of them had imagined. Because the financial web they started to untangle showed that people were making choices on purpose, not just because they didn't understand each other. Kody moves around in his seat and whispers to his lawyer while Robyn's hands are on the seat in front of her. As Meri goes on, the courtroom is almost painfully quiet. She says that as they put the pieces of information together, they saw that some important decisions had been made without everyone agreeing, and some documents had signatures or acknowledgments that were wrong or missing. At first, they weren't sure what to do, hoping these were just simple mistakes, but the more they looked into it, the more it looked like it was on purpose. The lawyer gently pushes, "Did she ever talk to Kody directly about her worries?" Meri nods, and her voice is stronger now. She talks about a private conversation in which she asked for more information about the recent property decisions and the financial structure. Meri says that Kody's answer was calm but dismissive. He told her that everything was fair and in the best interest of the family, but there was something in his voice that made her doubt whether what he said was true. Meri would always remember that moment of small deception when she realized the stakes were higher than she had ever thought. The lawyer wants to know if she did anything else after that talk. Meri says that she started writing down everything she could, like keeping copies of emails, notes, and records, cross-referencing property deeds, and writing down the dates of financial transactions. She talks about how she spent long nights at the kitchen table going over papers and putting together a timeline that went back years. With each new piece of information, her desire to learn the truth grew stronger. But it also took a bigger emotional toll on her as she realized how much trust had been broken. Finding out the truth about Kody and the property arrangements also meant facing the fact that the family she loved may have been in danger for years. The lawyer nods, knowing how important her testimony is, and then moves a little to ask about Robyn's part in the family's money. Meri thinks for a moment before speaking. She says that Robyn had always been close to Kody, and even though she trusted her motives, some of the property purchases seemed to help her family more than others. She talks about times when Robyn might have known about choices that affected the financial stability of other households, but didn't say anything or ask for more information. The lawyer lets the statement sit in the room for a while, knowing how heavy it is emotionally. And the idea that someone else in the family may have knowingly profited while others didn't know about it adds a level of tension that everyone in the courtroom can feel. Kody's lawyer stands up right away and says that the idea that Robyn did something wrong is not evidence but speculation. The judge nods and tells the lawyer to stick to the facts, but the courtroom is already filled with suspicion and unease. Meri goes on, bringing the conversation back to her own life. She talks about how she and Christine decided to get Janelle more involved after months of writing down differences. They formed a small group to look over financial records and property agreements in an open way. The collaboration showed even more inconsistencies, and the picture that came out was one of carefully planned choices that, in Meri's opinion, favored Kody and Robyn's household over the others. And with each new piece of information, the emotional stakes for everyone in the room rose, making the tension so high that it could be felt from the back row of the gallery to the front bench. The lawyer asks Meri if she was ever afraid of getting in trouble or getting back at her for bringing up these issues. She says she did, and she talks about how she couldn't sleep and how she was scared that facing the truth could ruin not only her finances, but also her relationships and emotional bonds that had taken decades to build. She talks about the inner conflict she felt between being loyal to her family and making sure that everything was fair and open. The people in the courtroom are paying close attention because they can tell that she is weak behind her calm voice. Because behind every recorded difference is a human story of betrayal, fear, and bravery that most people who see it will never forget. Meri says that Christine was the one who suggested getting a lawyer involved, stressing that the situation had gotten too bad for the family to handle on their own and needed formal help. She says that suggestion was hard for everyone involved because it meant facing Kody directly in a court of law, which none of them had ever thought would happen. As the conversation goes on, the people in the courtroom become more and more aware of how this trial has already affected them emotionally. The lawyer gently asks Meri for specific examples of the problems with the property and money. She talks about dates, numbers, and times when money was given out in ways that were not in line with the original agreements. She points out that some transfers happened just days after certain meetings, which makes people wonder about the timing and purpose of the transfers. Each piece of information is given with quiet precision, making the courtroom lean forward, eager to hear the next piece. And with each new piece of information, the air gets thicker, as if the walls were listening and holding their breath. Kody shifts uncomfortably and whispers urgently to his lawyer, while Robyn's face stays calm but tense. The lawyer asks Meri if she ever talked to Robyn about any of these things. Meri nods and says that she did, and that Robyn insisted she didn't know anything wrong and thought all decisions had been made openly. But Meri talks about a specific time when Robyn's behavior made it seem like she might have known more than she said. The lawyer lets this comment sit in the room, knowing that innuendo and small hints can be just as important as documents in a courtroom drama. Because the tension between what is said and what is not said can be the strongest proof of all. Meri goes on to talk about how hard it is to face Kody and Robyn together emotionally. She talks about the strained looks, the subtle body language, and the almost imperceptible sighs that said so much. She tells about a time when Kody's voice got a little louder, not out of anger, but out of controlled frustration. He said that the financial structure had been fair and that anyone who thought otherwise was wrong. But Meri's careful notes went against this story, which made the tension in the courtroom grow. The lawyer asks if Meri ever felt like Kody's answers were a threat to her. She says she did, and she explains that his need for control and calm but firm demeanor made her wonder if bringing up these issues would have effects outside of the courtroom. And as Meri talks, everyone in the room can see that the emotional stakes are just as high as the legal ones. The lawyer changes the subject and asks Meri to talk about how she thinks the family has communicated over the years. She talks about times when some spouses weren't invited to meetings, decisions were made in private, and changes to agreements weren't made clear. She talks about how these actions made things unclear and untrustworthy, which led to the decision to go to court. The gallery is quiet, taking in the weight of her words. Kody and Robyn, on the other hand, are unusually quiet, with tight faces. Every new piece of information feels like a slow burning fuse that could spark long-standing family tensions into a full-blown fight. Meri goes on to talk about how this process has affected her emotionally, from not being able to sleep at night to the stress of knowing that her testimony could change how people see her family forever. Even though she was scared and anxious, she says she had to speak up because she thought the truth had to come out. The lawyer thanks her for being honest, then slowly moves on to the next set of papers, which include emails, property transfers, and financial statements that back up what she said. As the exhibits are shown in court, everyone in the room can feel how big the case is. The evidence, along with Meri's own story, starts to paint a picture that could change everything fans have seen on TV. Kody's lawyer speaks up again to object to some of the exhibits, saying they don't have enough context. However, the judge lets the documents stay with the court for consideration. The gallery whispers in excitement, knowing that each document could show a new level of complexity or a small change in what was once thought to be a simple family structure. Before she is let go, Meri is asked one last question. Did she think the differences in money and property were planned? She looks straight ahead, and her voice is steady, but it carries the weight of years of watching and feeling. She says slowly, "I don't know every detail of everyone's intentions, but the results of these decisions have caused inequality and pain that could have been avoided if there had been openness from the start." The courtroom takes in the statement, feeling the weight of the accusation without it being fully directed at any one person. When Meri leaves the witness stand, everyone in the room is left with a sense of dread and anticipation, knowing that the next session could bring even more shocking news. The courtroom feels heavier than ever as Meri sits down again. The echoes of her testimony still ring out in the polished wood space, and everyone, lawyers, family members, and spectators, seems to be holding their breath, waiting for what comes next. Kody Brown leans back in his chair, drums his fingers on the armrest, and tightens his jaw. A small flicker of doubt in his eyes shows that he is not as calm as he wants to be. Robyn Brown sits still across the room, her hands tightly clasped in her lap and her eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom, as if she were trying to look calm while a storm of fear and anxiety rages inside her. The judge moves in his chair and signals for the next part of the trial. The lawyers stand with a calmness that hides the stress they must be feeling. The air is thick, with years of unspoken words, hidden actions, and the knowledge that one piece of testimony could change decades of family dynamics in an instant. The lawyer for Christine, Janelle, and Meri steps forward again. The soft creak of his shoes on the hardwood floor sounds like a metronome marking the rhythm of a drama that is about to get more intense. He starts to talk, bringing up the financial problems, the property changes, and the conversations that the three wives had already talked about. His voice is calm, but each word has a small weight that makes the accusation seem more serious without making him angry. And with every carefully chosen word, the people in the courtroom lean in closer, sensing that the next revelations could make the tension even worse than it has ever been. He pushes a new stack of papers across the table, telling them to be used as evidence. They have messages, signatures, and records that, when looked at closely, suggest a complicated plan for redistributions that seem to favor Kody and Robyn, often putting the other households at a disadvantage. The lawyer shows the court a series of emails sent over a period of years that talk about proposed changes to the property and the money that would be moved around. Janelle, Christine, and Meri are asked to explain what they think these papers mean, and each of them starts to talk about how confused, frustrated, and emotionally drained they were as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing and what they had been promised in the family's agreements. And the tension in the room grows so strong that it feels like the walls are pressing down on the secrets being revealed. Kody's lawyer stands up to object, saying that the emails could be read wrong without the right context of private conversations that happened off the record. The judge thinks about the objection very carefully, but he lets the documents stay part of the evidence. He says that they will be looked at in light of witness testimony and cross-examination. Kody moves again in his seat, and as he leans toward his lawyer and whispers something, Robyn's hands tighten around her folded notes, but her face stays calm. The gallery whispers a little, but the judge tells them to be quiet, and the courtroom goes quiet again, with everyone straining to hear the next piece of news. The lawyer steps back toward the witness stand and calls Christine up to give more testimony. Christine stands up gracefully, her posture strong, but with a slight tremor of emotion beneath her calm exterior. She takes the oath, sits down, and puts her hands on the wooden railing in front of her. The lawyer starts asking direct questions, starting with how she found mistakes in her family's financial records. Christine talks about nights spent going over papers, comparing notes with Janelle and Meri, and slowly figuring out a web of choices and changes that seem to always tip the scales of property and resources in Kody and Robyn's favor. And as she talks, a shiver runs through the courtroom, and everyone can feel the weight of every secret choice that has finally been revealed. She talks about how this process affected her emotionally, the sleepless nights, the whispered fights, and the heartbreak of realizing that trust, which had been the family's foundation, may have been used against them. Christine explains that she and the other wives began coordinating their findings, constructing a timeline to present in court, but even this effort carried risks, as confronting Kody directly in a legal setting felt like stepping into a battlefield. The attorney asks Christine if there were moments when she felt particularly threatened or intimidated. She admits there were, recalling one private conversation where Kody's tone, though calm, carried an unspoken pressure, a subtle insistence that questions be dropped, that decisions be accepted without challenge. Christine explains that this only strengthened her resolve to ensure that transparency and fairness were upheld, even as the emotional weight of challenging her husband in such a public way pressed heavily on her shoulders. And the courtroom listens intently, each word Christine utters building suspense as if a dam of decades-long tension is slowly beginning to crack. Christine continues, describing the deep emotional conflict she faced, loyalty to the family versus the responsibility to uphold fairness and integrity. She talks about times when she felt torn between loving her kids and wanting to keep the peace in the family, knowing that unfairness might be quietly affecting the future of their shared assets. The lawyer lets the story unfold slowly, making sure that every detail of her testimony is heard and every subtle emotional cue is picked up. This is because the drama is not only in the facts, but also in the human experience behind them. Christine talks about a very scary time when a property transfer happened out of the blue. On paper, it looked like a normal transfer, but in reality, it gave Kody and Robyn a lot more control. She remembers the confusion, the quiet questions she asked Meri and Janelle, and the unspoken understanding that had passed between the wives. They all knew that their trust had been broken in ways they couldn't have predicted. And as she talks about this moment, the courtroom is pulled into the emotional intensity, feeling the shock and betrayal as if it were their own. The lawyer asks Christine to explain how she felt when these patterns became clear in a gentle way. Christine's voice shakes a little as she talks about how she couldn't believe it at first, and then slowly realized that the family structure she had relied on for years was being broken down on purpose. She talks about a late-night talk with Janelle in which both women agreed that Kody and Robyn's house had gotten more than its fair share of benefits, and that the lack of openness had made things more likely to go wrong. The lawyer keeps asking Christine how she wrote down these findings. She says that she carefully put together detailed notes, copies of emails, property deeds, and timelines that made a complete record of decisions, meetings, and communications that showed both the order of events and the emotional tone of each interaction. And this careful planning is what makes it possible for the courtroom to really understand how deep the conflict is, turning dry papers into a real story of trust, betrayal, and tension. Christine goes on to tell the story of a key moment when she and Meri found a number of transfers that were dated just a few days after a family meeting where it was decided that all decisions would stay communal. She says the timing was too exact to be a coincidence, and it became a key part of the case. The courtroom seems to lean forward as if it wants to catch every little thing. Kody moves around in his seat and whispers to his lawyer again while Robyn keeps her mouth shut, but her knuckles turn white around her hands. Christine's lawyer asks her to talk about how she was feeling at the time. She talks about how frustrating, scary, and sad it was to find out that decisions that affected everyone in the family were being made without full transparency. She says that it's hard for her to balance her love for her family with her duty to make sure that everyone is treated fairly. The courtroom becomes a place where the Brown family's personal and collective pain is felt by everyone in the audience. Christine talks about more private conversations she had with Meri and Janelle, explaining how they carefully planned and coordinated the decision to take legal action. She says that going to court was scary but necessary because her attempts to fix the problems on her own had failed. The lawyer asks her to explain what she thought would happen when she got to court. Christine says she wanted things to be clear, open, and honest, and for everyone to admit their mistakes. But she was afraid that people would fight back, deny things, or get upset, which could make the family even more broken. The courtroom is tense as she talks about the moments before the trial began, when she was nervous about seeing Kody and Robyn sitting across from her, and how years of silence weighed on every interaction. And the tension grows as the court waits for the next piece of information, knowing that the story has only just begun. Christine keeps talking about times when Kody's answers were careful but vague, and when small hints made it seem like he knew about decisions that might have hurt other families. She talks about times when Robyn's reactions seemed almost automatic, as if she were trying to protect Kody, and how the way their family interacted with other families added layers of tension that had been hidden from outsiders for years. The lawyer lets Christine explain her plan during this time, keeping detailed records, asking careful questions, and working with Janelle and Meri to put together a story that would hold up in court. And with each layer of testimony, the tension grows, pulling the courtroom deeper into a web of secrets, strategic choices, and emotional complexity. Christine talks about a turning point when she realized that a financial transfer that she had thought was harmless had actually changed who would have long-term control over a key property. She talks about how shocked she was, what she asked Meri and Janelle right away, and how slowly she came to understand that this was part of a pattern, not just a one-time thing. Everyone in the courtroom is quiet, and the weight of the news is heavy on their chests. Kody's face tightens, Robyn stays calm but tense, and the audience can feel that the family's power may be changing right in front of them. If these patterns are confirmed, the effects could change not only the Brown family's finances, but also the emotional ties and trust that have kept them together for decades. Christine ends her testimony by talking about the emotional journey she has been on, the heartbreak of betrayal, the bravery it took to face the truth, and the hope that honesty and justice will eventually bring some balance back to the family. She gets off the witness stand, and the courtroom is silent with tension. The audience is on the edge of their seats, knowing that the next session could make things even more tense and exciting. The air in the courtroom is thick with anticipation as everyone waits for the next chapter in the Brown family's drama. Janelle Brown stands up again to take the witness stand. Her movements are calm but purposeful, and her eyes show both determination and the exhaustion of years of dealing with an ever more complicated web of family dynamics. She folds her hands in front of her and looks briefly at Christine Brown and Meri Brown, who give her subtle nods of encouragement. Then she turns her attention to the attorney questioning her, the gallery, and the judge. She knows that every word she says will have an impact not only on the legal case, but also on the emotional impact of the whole trial. The lawyer starts off with a calm, steady voice and asks Janelle to explain why she was so careful about the family's finances. This makes her remember long nights spent comparing documents, emails, and property agreements with Christine and Meri, finding differences that at first seemed like mistakes, but later showed a pattern of deliberate choices that favored Kody and Robyn. As Janelle tells her story, the tension in the room grows. Every pause, glance, and sigh carries the weight of years of trust and betrayal. She talks about the moment she found out that some property deeds had been changed in ways that gave Kody and Robyn's family an unfair advantage. You can hear the emotional effect this news had on her voice. The lawyer gently pushes her to talk about the specific times she saw things that weren't right. Janelle talks about meetings that happened without all the spouses being there, late-night conversations that weren't explained, and decisions that were made before the whole family could have a say. These are examples of how the family's shared system of equality and fairness slowly broke down. She talks about how these actions, which were small at first, built up over the years to give one household an unfair advantage, causing both emotional stress and real financial problems. And with each new piece of information, the courtroom feels the tension rise as the audience realizes how deep the manipulation is and how brave it is to bring it to light. Janelle remembers a very emotional time when she talked to Kody alone about her worries. At first he was calm, but then he started to defend himself by saying that all decisions were made with fairness in mind. However, the way he spoke made it sound like he was hiding something. The lawyer lets Janelle talk about how she felt inside during the conversation, including her anger, fear, and feeling of betrayal. She also talks about how she and the other wives are starting to realize that the patterns they found were not random, but planned. She stresses that facing Kody was both necessary and scary because she knew that doing so could change the way people saw loyalty and relationships in the family. And the emotional intensity rises as the audience realizes that the legal stakes are also personal, which creates a gripping tension that draws them deeper into the story. The lawyer then asks Janelle to talk about what she did after she noticed these mistakes. She goes into great detail about how she carefully recorded all relevant interactions, looked over financial records, and worked with Christine and Meri to make sure that their observations were correct and could be verified. This created a detailed timeline of property and financial decisions that showed inconsistencies and possible intentionality behind the allocations. The courtroom is very quiet as she speaks. The weight of her testimony shows how important it is legally and how much it has cost people over the years. Janelle stops for a moment to think about how this process has affected her emotionally, the sleepless nights, the stress of facing family members, and the constant battle to balance her love for her family with her moral duty to seek openness and fairness. Because each fact has a story of personal bravery, fear, and the heavy weight of responsibility behind it, the courtroom drama and emotional impact are heightened. She talks about specific times when documents were changed or moved without full discussion, stressing how carefully these actions were carried out, which made them hard to find until all the evidence was put together. The lawyer kindly asks her to tell him more about how she and the other wives felt about these new facts. Janelle says that at first they didn't believe what they heard, but then they did careful research, worked together, and made plans to handle the situation with both legal rigor and emotional clarity. This made sure that their case was both strong and believable. She talks about times when they were scared and tense, as well as times when they talked quietly late at night about the evidence and how to move forward, knowing that telling the truth could cause a lot of trouble in the family. And the tension builds as the audience realizes that the emotional stakes are just as high as the legal ones, with family ties, trust, and loyalty on the line. The lawyer changes the subject and asks Janelle to talk about a very important time when she realized how much she had been manipulated. Janelle talks about going over a number of property transfers that happened soon after family meetings where everyone was supposed to talk about and agree on decisions. The timing, paperwork, and lack of clear communication made it seem like someone was trying to help one family over another, and this realization hit her hard emotionally. She talks about how shocked, betrayed, and responsible she feels to act, knowing that the family structure and relationships depend on being open and honest about these differences. And the tension in the courtroom grows even more as each new piece of information makes the case seem more complicated and difficult. Janelle goes on to talk about how she kept a delicate balance between being confrontational and diplomatic. She talks about her conversations with Kody, Robyn, and the other wives, paying attention to small details like body language and the tensions that came up in private conversations. She stresses that every choice and action had emotional weight, so it was important to think carefully about both the personal and legal effects. The lawyer makes the audience feel the pressure and complexity by asking Janelle to think about how these things have affected her personally. She talks about her anxiety, sleepless nights, and the constant battle between loyalty and the search for truth. This shows how uncovering long-hidden differences in family matters can hurt people. Because every moment in this testimony is full of emotion, it builds suspense and keeps the audience on the edge of their seats. The lawyer then asks Janelle to talk about Robyn's role in the financial decisions, which makes her remember things that made it seem like Robyn's role was more important than they had thought. Janelle points out small interactions, well-timed property transfers, and communications that showed people were aware of, if not directly involved in, decisions that were good for Kody and Robyn's household. She stresses that she can't say for sure what the intent was, but the way things happen makes it clear that there is an imbalance and selective transparency. The courtroom reacts in a subtle way, as Janelle's testimony settles like a slow, heavy tide. Both family members and observers are very aware of how complicated these discoveries are and what they could mean. As the tension rises, the audience becomes more and more involved in the story, caring not only about the legal outcomes, but also about how the family's problems will be solved emotionally. Janelle talks about how hard it was to work with Christine and Meri, sharing paperwork, observations, and plans to make sure they all work together in the legal process. She talks about times when she was scared and unsure, how hard it was to stay calm, and how she was always looking for clarity in a situation that was full of doubt. Every detail adds to the drama as it unfolds, showing how weak people are behind the legal arguments. The lawyer asks Janelle to explain how all of these efforts came to a head before the court case. She talks about how carefully the evidence was prepared, how carefully the order of witness testimony was chosen, and how carefully the stories were made to best tell the truth while avoiding unnecessary conflict. She stresses the emotional strength it takes to fully participate, knowing that her words, papers, and observations could change how people see family dynamics forever. As the courtroom takes this in, the tension rises to a boiling point, with the audience fully invested in both the emotional and legal stakes of the case. In the end, Janelle talks about what the trial means for the family as a whole. She talks about the hope for openness, the need to rebuild trust, and the hope that the lessons learned from this difficult time will help keep things like this from happening again. Her voice has a quiet strength that mixes resilience and weariness, and it touches everyone who hears it. The lawyer thanks her for being honest and brave, which lets her leave. The courtroom is quiet for a moment, and the weight of her testimony is still felt, because in this session, every new piece of information, every carefully told detail, and every small emotional cue have built up to a peak of suspense and drama, making the audience want to know what happens next in the Brown family story.